I'm always interested this time of year. Obviously it's March Madness, and Lord knows I love March Madness. Shelby Mast is with us now, USA Today bracketologist, but more so just because every year kind of has a theme. And I'm curious, Shelby. Thank you again for joining us. The theme for this year, as it pertains to your job. The difference between this year and other years when doing brackets is what?
Well, Zach, thanks for having me. I think one of the things for me this year that has been different in years past is the amount of one-seed contenders that are legitimately deserving of a one seed. Usually we've got two or three that are there, and then that last one, you're picking from about three or four that really don't make a super strong case. But this year we've got 6, possibly 7 teams that have a legit shot for the one seed. Now, Kentucky's not going anywhere, but everybody else could.
Speaking of, let me start there then, because even though it doesn't have to do with our local teams per se, Todd and I have my co-host here have had conversations about this Big 12 tournament, which obviously we're in Big 12 country, and just the kind of shot that Kansas has to being a one seed. How many other teams would have to lose during their conference tournament for Kansas to vault their way up to a one seed if they were to win their own?
You would need somebody besides Duke or Virginia to win the ACC, Villanova not win the Big East, Arizona not win the Pac-12, and Wisconsin not win the Big 10. I think that would have to happen for Kansas to be in the conversation, a realistic shot at it.
Shelby, does any of that change if Cliff Alexander weren't suspended right now and Perry Ellis wasn't coming off an injury, or is that the case regardless for Kansas? They would need all that help.
I think that's the case regardless. They ended up with a 2 last year, and they had injury issues, and I kind of felt they might fall to a 3 just because of those injury issues, but that didn't turn out that way. The committee kind of just overlooked it and went on their full season merit, and I think that's what will happen this year.
Shelby Mast with us, USA Today bracketologist. She joins us in the Little Caesars Hot and Ready hotline on 107.7 The Franchise. Oklahoma, they're an interesting case here locally just because it feels like they haven't played their best basketball for the last half of the Big 12 season, even though they've won 9 of 11. It's a very interesting case, but I don't know how much that's even paid attention to as it pertains to a selection committee. I mean, my guess is a lot of it's just looked at as wins and losses. So with all that being the backdrop, what do you think their ceiling is for the NCAA tournament?
I've got them as a 3 right now, and I feel pretty confident that's where they're going to stay. Their first game in the Big 12, if I remember, it's Oklahoma State. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah, 3-6. It would be the 3-6 game.
Right, so if they lose that, that's not really a bad loss. Oklahoma State is in. They've got some good wins. And so I don't think that would be a bad loss. At least not enough to drop them unless Notre Dame were to come on, and that could move them a little bit. Northern Iowa, I think, is pretty set. Baylor making a run, Louisville, West Virginia, any of those teams making a run if Oklahoma loses first round. But that's a lot that has to happen for them to drop.
Are teams better off sometimes not playing in a first-round game against a bottom-of-the-barrel opponent in their own conference if they're on the bubble?
If they're on the bubble?
Yeah,
that's probably best, is to avoid that game and avoid a potential bad loss.
So in other words, you'd rather have the bye and not improve your resume, even if it's by a little, than to have the chance at losing it all.
I think so, because I got to believe that plays in their mind, knowing that they're going to play tentative. If we lose this game, this could be it, and we're headed to the NIT. For young kids, that might be a lot for them. But you're going to see that in the SEC. There's going to be some teams like Ole Miss, Texas A&M that are very, very close to being out, and they may end up having to play one of those bad teams, and knowing that they probably need to win to at least stay in the conversation, and then a loss might end it.
Well, the reason I asked that is because of the of Oklahoma State. Now they end up being a 6 seed and they play Oklahoma, so crisis I'm assuming averted there. However, if they would have fallen to a 7, then they would have taken on the worst team in the Big 12 in the first game, in Texas Tech, and I'm not sure. If you lose that game, I don't know. Would Oklahoma State qualify as one of those teams now that you might have locked into the NCAA tournament just because their next game is against a team that won't be an embarrassing loss if they lose it?
Well, they've played a good schedule. They've got several top 50 wins, and the committee stresses that they're looking at the entire body of work, not just how you're doing lately. But had they been in that 7-10 game against Tech, I think a loss and they still stay in, but they would probably end up a double-digit seed. And they may end up a double-digit seed anyways, depending on what other teams around them do. But they could have been moving closer to a play-in game.
Shelby Mast is our guest, USA Today bracketologist here on 107.7 The Franchise. Is it fair to say, Shelby, that Texas is a team that's going to be sitting around on championship game days and rooting for the favorites because they're going to need no big upsets to happen in these conference tournaments to get in?
Yeah, they should send a bouquet of flowers to Northern Iowa.
No doubt.
What they did yesterday. I think if they get one win, I can't say a lock, but if they beat Iowa State, they're a lock. But I don't know. They're interesting because they have no bad losses at all, but there's not a whole lot of great wins. They've got 2, really, Baylor and West Virginia, and you throw Iowa in there if you want, but that's a mediocre win. It is top 50, but if they don't win at least their first game, then absolutely they will have a very tense Sunday.
What about another team here locally? What about Tulsa? They've lost a couple games in a row against Cincinnati and SMU here recently, but again, especially once conference season started, no really bad losses for Tulsa. Where do they stand right now?
They are 2 out for me. If this was a 70-team bracket, I'd have them in. And I want them to get in. I want that game against SMU yesterday. They're a good team. SMU is really good this year, and they hung in there with them on SMU's home court, senior night, all that, playing against them. And they hung in there and played well. The drawback for me is that Division II loss earlier in the year at home. That does not factor into the RPI, but that information is on the team sheets that the committee looks at. So it will be discussed. And I know there was team turmoil back then. Coach had stuff going on, and that will be taken under consideration. I think for them to get into the tournament, they have to at least get to the conference tournament finals, beating Cincinnati along the way. If it's somebody other than Cincinnati that they play, then they probably have to win the conference tournament.
Shelby Mast with us on 107.7 The Franchise, bracketologist for USA Today. Just out of curiosity, in your history of doing this, and I don't know if you'll be able to do this or not, Shelby, just because this is probably a tough thing to do, but can you remember how many teams that maybe you were in your first 1, 2, or 3 out, like Tulsa, going into championship week, the percentage of those teams that made it in?
Oh, boy, no, I don't know if I can do that or not because everything changes daily, and I don't save everything from previous. I know it's happened, and I've had teams that I really wanted to get in that I didn't put in because I didn't think they would make it, but then did make it. They helped their case along the way. Usually this time of year, you're seeing those teams that are right on the outside falling off.
I guess my question would be, how often does championship week change teams from off the board to in the field?
It does. I'll say 30% of the time, maybe.
Interesting.
It's doable, but it's tough. And it's one of those where you don't control your own destiny. Well, I guess you do if you win the tournament, but
right.
You're relying on other teams around you to lose as well, just as they are relying on you to lose. And so it's you don't control it completely.
Go ahead. I have an overall question, Todd. What do you have?
Mine's kind of overall too. I'll just ask this quickly. Zach and I were talking last week, Shelby, about you'd almost rather be like a 6 or 7 seed than be the 2 seed in Kentucky's region. Can you remember the last time where teams wanted this badly to avoid being in the same region as one team like Kentucky?
A lot of teams want to avoid Duke. In past years they've been a solid one, and of course you got those teams that bring on Duke. We can beat them, and to me that's not good. You want to advance in the tournament. What's going to end up happening, I think, which kind of stinks, is Wisconsin is probably going to end up a 2 seed in the same region with Kentucky. And the NCAA, the way they do things now, they don't do that true S curve where whoever the fourth number 1 seed automatically plays the first number 2. It's broken down by geography. They're trying to make travel as easy as possible. And Kentucky and Wisconsin slot into that Midwest region in Cleveland. And somebody on CBS yesterday was kind of bad-mouthing the committee for that. Well, then they had the committee chair on there, and we're doing it by geography. That's the way. That's the rule. That's what we're doing. And so that may kind of stink for Wisconsin. There's going to be a lot of teams that don't want to be in that Midwest region, but then there'll be some that say, hey, let us have a shot to beat them.
The biggest misconception about the selection committee is what?
Well, there's a few. I think one of them is they go for intriguing matchups. That plays absolutely no part in it at all. And just me doing my own bracket, I have gone back and looked at it and said, wow, how did I get those two matched up? Last year I had, at one point, Minnesota playing Louisville in the first round. And it didn't click until I realized Patino versus
Patino, right.
And there's been several times this year I've had Baylor against Valparaiso, brother versus brother. And you're not even thinking about that. It's not something that there's so many things that go into this that they're just not they're not doing that. Another misconception, they dislike teams or conferences. They're not going to put they try to make things geographically work. And so in the same region, you'll have multiple teams from the same state. And they're not trying to punish or penalize and make sure that not more than one team from a state gets to the Final Four. It just works out for the geographic reason. And it's they don't even really pay attention to how they have the matchups until they get the bracket all the way done, and then they go back and look and like, oh, wow, look what we did there.
Interesting stuff. Shelby, we appreciate the time. We know you're very, very busy this time of year.
One more question, Shelby, because Zach's an IU grad. Are the Hoosiers getting in?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, boy. Well, see, I write for Indy Star, too, and I have had a lot of hate mail this year for having Indiana in. They want their coach gone, the fans.
Isn't that wild? Oh.
And so they want their team not to make it, so he's got a better chance of being fired. I think if they win one game, maybe two, or play that second one close, the second would be against Maryland, it's going to be tough to keep them out. They've got 4 top 50 wins that are good wins. They've only got one really bad loss. And I know they're not playing so great right now, but this is a thing where the committee will look at the entire body of work. Ugh. And so what you did in November is just as important as what you did in March. That may save them.
Appreciate you coming on, Shelby. Thanks a lot.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, man. Shelby Mast.